Fisheye.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Monk Chat with Ayasoma and company. So she's the star of the show. Let's all give 3 cheers for Ayasoma. Come on, round of applause for Ayasoma. Come on.
Okay, I guess I'll self-applaud.
Okay, very good. So let's see. Gabriela says, hope you're all healthy and that things are well. Somewhat, yeah, passable. We're surviving. So hello, Gita, Gabriela, Jens, Kaylon, Ned, Melinda, Mary, John, Liz, Mark. Hello to all of you. So Gabriela asks, my first question is about a friend of mine who is going to watch this later. My friend decided to work for a company, realizing that it was supporting the military, and the feeling of discomfort with this profession is growing because they feel like it compromises their ethics, but they also want to pay off their debts quickly to ordain. How can they avoid harm in such a profession in the meantime? By quitting their job and getting a different job, which doesn't support the military. So that's a pretty easy answer. Okay, next question.
Or perhaps we can ask Venerable Pamuto, since he actually experienced his late life once upon a time.
Yeah, and he got out of it by leaving the military, so I'm not sure he's the right guy to answer this either.
I mean, I did, honestly. This person is not in the military. They're working in a support position to the military, but that's too vague. I think the real question is, are they supporting the military or are they supporting people who work for the military? Because there's many clinical professions. There's doctors, there's dentists, there's food service people, there's counselors, there's chaplains who are taking care of the human beings who are in this awkward job that is messed up in terms of livelihood. Some come in for a good reason, but often it just doesn't work out for the best. So that's the real question first. Like, just blanket, like, working in some way that has something to do with the military. Well, that defines 1 million people in this country. So narrow it down. Like, and what does it feel like? That's the basic standard. There are people who work in like labs, and they know that the next room over, there's animal testing done. And they're not doing the animal testing, but it feels bad. That's the clue that the livelihood might be off, that maybe the organization is compromised. But this person could be doing something where every single day they're taking care of people. Those people are in the military, but it could be if they really get down to it, what they're doing is humanitarian, is uplifting. But then again, you mentioned money, so they're probably just in it for the money. And if that's the case, they're probably compromising their ethics. If the money comes in as a factor, then they're probably trying to convince themselves it's worth doing. But still, just go through the questions, like really analyze, what is it? And yeah, I met a lot of people who were in the military for monetary reasons, and it seemed quite sad to me because of the things that they were doing and the things that they were giving up for a sense of security. It wasn't real security.
Okay, thank you. Another thing that I would add to this is it also sounds like your friend has this attitude of just getting into ordination as quickly as possible, no matter what they do in the meantime. But that's quite an unwholesome attitude, because what you're doing before you get ordained is still producing karma. And that reflects on your mind. And also it's a reflection of how seriously one is actually taking the Noble Eightfold Path. So as Dante Pumoto pointed out, there's not enough information here to say whether the person is practicing right livelihood or wrong livelihood. But if the person is practicing wrong livelihood in order to pay off their debts and get into monastic life, well, then that means that they're not practicing correctly. Here and now, they're practicing incorrectly. So that's tainted. It's a good intention, but mixed with tainted intention as well. So that's not so good. Again, I would say it's better for them to take a little bit longer paying off their debts rather than to do something that's tainted. Any other thoughts on this one?
No, I think so.
Okay. So in other words, what I first said, which is quit their job and get a different one. Let's see. Kaylon asks, is human rebirth always rare? Ayasama?
Antisumano?
Yes. Next question.
Okay. Ned says, do we do meditation before the chat? I hope so. I hope you've been doing meditation for actually the whole day before the monk chat. That would be great. But it's not part of the official program because there's usually so many questions that we want to make sure there's time for all of them. But yeah, you should do lots of meditation before the monk chat. I think that's a great idea. Gabriella asks, the second question I have is about the practice of meditation to mindfully cope with pain and nausea. I've been very sick and have been trying to cope with illness, but nausea interferes a lot. How do I mindfully sustain my samadhi when I'm dealing with sudden physical changes and nausea? Aya? Hey, no.
But he had a Zen answer, so he needs to explain. He needs
Well,
to talk
and
more.
you skipped your turn, so you need to talk more too.
I'll take the next one.
I don't have much experience with pain and nausea, so.
I think you should answer this one.
So what is the question again?
She says she's been very sick and been trying to cope with illness, but nausea interferes a lot. How do I mindfully sustain samadhi when dealing with sudden physical changes and nausea?
All right. Well, first of all, being gentle with yourself. I know that you're an overachiever. We have another overachiever in the audience currently who can be really hard on herself. So always reminding that, so that this path, as the Buddha said, is beautiful at the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. So whenever it's not beautiful, there's something, our approach is a little bit off. So that is the first reminder. The second one is also reminding ourselves that, once again, dealing with nausea, with pain, when it's not just, the average sort of dukkha, is pretty challenging, especially at the beginning of our practice, and especially if we haven't achieved any kind of sort of more permanent stage of the practice. So in other words, if we are not a stream enter, pretty much dealing with pain is something very difficult. So I guess the second is a little bit similar to the first. Be gentle with yourself and be understanding. And the third one is that a lot of what we perceive as obstacles can be great opportunities for us to practice. So whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, so whether we're experiencing extreme dukkha in one shape or form, physical or immaterial, quote unquote, it creates the conditions for us to really understand what the First Noble Truth is. And sometimes, we have to understand when is the appropriate time to cultivate certain aspects of the path. So if samadhi for you is very challenging, well, then perhaps in those situations, what is really appropriate is to actually just be courageous enough to just look at the pain. And really look at the nausea, really understand that. It's a great opportunity to actually really try to subdivide our experience. So normally we think of whatever we're experiencing, we think about our experience rather than experiencing our experience. But there's a lot of information happening. There is what we call the body, there is what we call feelings, there is what we call the mind relating to all of that. But normally we just have a sort of jumbled up experience. But when we have extreme pain or extreme nausea, then first of all, the mind naturally gravitates towards it. So instead of thinking that that is a sort of deficiency of the practice, as something that is pulling us off from our meditation object, it actually can be a great opportunity for practice. It can be something where, first of all, the mind naturally gravitates towards it, and we can keep it there because it's naturally interesting, perhaps in an aversive way, but it is naturally interesting. We keep it there and we really understand what is the part of my experience that is the body, what is the part of my experience that is feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. How are they distinct, the body and the feelings? And how is the mind responding in all of this? So really fully understanding, once again, I love the definition of meditation in Tibetan Buddhism, that means familiarizing. So familiarizing, becoming familiar with the mind, with the nature of the mind. This is the practice of meditation, in essence. We really try to understand what the hell are we doing with our mind in every single moment. So removing ourselves from what we think pain is, what we think nausea is, what we think the body is, and actually seeing, knowing what pain is, what nausea is, what any pleasant sensation even is, anything, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and how it is in relation to, once again, the body and the mind. So those are my thoughts.
Okay. Then Gita says, this question has been asked of the regular Bhantes in a previous chat. How does one tame, train, transform, and transcend the mind? Well, it's still the regular Bhantes, so I think we can skip that one.
Yes, unfortunately, the new venerables are a little bit tired because they had to travel the whole day. So I'm sorry for the fake advertising. We weren't meeting. We were actually not breaking any precept. We really tried our best to have new Bhantes and new Ayas here. But perhaps we'll live stream tomorrow's event. So you'll see, you can see tomorrow we'll have. Stay tuned. All right.
Okay. So Gita says, second question not related to Buddhism. If you are a US citizen, will you be voting in November, hopefully to bring peace to the nation?
Well,
So,
we can have some answers, each one of us.
I am a US citizen and I do plan to vote.
I am a US citizen and I do plan to vote.
Same.
No pressure, Bhante.
It's a very complicated story, but I'm not registered to vote. I'm not registered for a lot of things.
But he is a US citizen.
I would like to vote. I would like to affect that, but it would be too complicated in my case. So instead, I'm going to encourage people take the time to vote.
Yeah. So, next question says, how can we understand the doctrine of rebirth in terms of the principle of non-self? Bhante Seminole.
And to my mind, it's somewhat simple, actually. So I'm thinking of a good analogy. Actually, one thing that came to mind was I had a friend who, in childhood, he had a sibling. He still has a sibling. But when they were both children, my friend did something really malicious to his brother. But he didn't know at the time, so he did something careless, and it really hurt his brother. So of course, my friend like completely forgot about it. So 10 years or so down the line, they're just having like a conversation or whatever, and his brother brings this up. He's like, you really said this thing to me when we were younger, and it hurt. They didn't necessarily have the best relationship while they were growing up. They're much closer now. But my friend couldn't really understand why they weren't that close growing up. But it turned out like 10, 15 years later that his brother had been holding a grudge this whole time for something that my friend had done when they were both children. So I bring up that analogy because we can look at our past forms, you could say. So as children, we can vaguely sometimes remember that we lived in this place, we had maybe the same name, and our parents were there, but they looked different as well. They were younger. But that person that existed, say, 10, 15 years ago, really, it's almost like we have nothing in common with them anymore. For some of us, our hair color changes, our eye color. We're taller, slimmer, fatter. We don't believe the same things we used to believe. Like, we don't believe in Santa Claus anymore, if we ever did, hopefully. We don't think the same way anymore. We don't like the things that we used to like. So in a lot of ways, actually, that person that we call ourselves from 10, 15 years ago is not us at all, actually. They're a completely different person in every imaginable way. So the teaching of not self is basically that principle, but in every moment. So in every moment, everything is changing. So to point at the me 10 minutes ago, who was maybe nodding off and grumpy or what have you, would be a little, sort of silly, if you will, because, well, now I'm not that way. I'm actually feeling more alert and interested in this question. So if we look at that over the span of a whole life, then it's pretty clear, actually. At the same time, as in the interaction with my friend, we do these things that have effects in the world. So that self from however many years ago did something that somebody else sort of held on to or remembered. And even though we can say that we're not that person anymore, and we really aren't, somehow that effect still comes around again. And if we remember, then we can be like, oh yeah, actually, that makes a lot of sense. But a lot of times we forget. And then when we forget, it's bewildering. We don't deserve this. We're confused. We're shocked. So this happened in the case of my friend with this grudge. But this happens to us all the time, actually, with illness, with accidents, with meeting people for the first time and they don't like us, with losing possessions, with anything catastrophic that seems to happen. And we're like, why me? Why is this happening to me? And it's all karma. It's all the effects of our past actions. And one of those past actions is choosing to be reborn in this body. To be reborn in this existence, to wanting to be happy and wanting to enjoy experiences. And that's what the human life can offer you. Of course, it's bundled up with old age, decay, illness, death, and a lot of suffering too. But it's the same way. So at some point, some being, if you will, that vaguely resembled us or thought somewhat similar to us or what have you, had this thought, wouldn't it be nice to be a human? and now we've forgotten. But here are these sort of effects. But again, that person wasn't really us to begin with. So it's not that we don't exist in any shape or form. Not self isn't the teaching of nothing exists and everything is meaningless. But it's also not the teaching, obviously, that there is this stable, permanent, consistent soul that just travels around either. Everything's just constantly changing. But just like if we, say, do something in the past and forget about it, that doesn't mean we're, saved of the consequences. They come back around, even if we're a completely different person in the end.
Okay, great. And Michael asks, are you supposed to hold your hands differently in a Vapasana meditation versus a Samadhi body style meditation? I'll take this one because it's easy. So the answer is, in the most Theravada meditation traditions, there is little or no importance placed on hand positions. Generally, the importance placed is just to put your hands in a stable position where you're not going to be moving them around, and something that feels supportive to your meditation. I do emphasize putting the hands in the Samadhi mudra, regardless of what meditation you're doing. But that's because I've found this particular meditation mudra to be extremely beneficial. It's something which, for me, encourages Samadhi, but also encourages an alertness of mind, which is helpful for Vipassana practice as well. But if you start getting into Vajrayana Buddhism, then they place tremendous importance on all kinds of different mudras for different purposes. So if that's the kind of thing that you like, then I would recommend looking at Tibetan Buddhism, and you'll learn about all kinds of mudras for different kinds of meditation practices. In East Asian Mahayana, similarly, they don't normally go much into mudras. Usually the emphasis is just on the standard Samadhi mudra. It's really only in the esoteric forms of Buddhism where they get really big on different hand positions for different meditation practices. Okay, next one. How do you practice right speech when talking about Trump? Aya? You keep avoiding questions, so I think we're going to have to make you answer one of these.
All right. So how to practice right speech when speaking about Trump? Our resident Antoinette is suggesting silent meditation. Silence pretty much is always a good idea in general. So
no.
One second. In general, just in life, we tend to talk a little bit too much sometimes. But I would say, taking as an example the Buddha. So it's not that the Buddha was always speaking, like everybody around him was great and only looking at the positive sides of people. He would talk in an appropriate way. So when there were positive traits, he would approve of the positive traits present in people. And when there were unwholesome traits, he would point out the unwholesome traits. And he would use sometimes also strong words. Sometimes you can find in the suttas where the Buddha refers to someone directly in their presence. Foolish man, for example. And we sometimes will read it and go like, oh, the Buddha just called someone foolish. As if that's, inappropriate. But what I found very interesting is the intention behind the words of the Buddha. And the intentions behind anyone who is enlightened is out of compassion for the person in front of them and for everyone else present in the room. So actually denouncing unwholesome behaviors is extremely helpful, it's extremely beneficial. Even when we are on the flip side, actually even more so, we should be constantly seeking admonishment from others, because only other people are aware of our delusion. I'm currently very aware of the delusion of my spiritual companions. Here, I have like big lists. I could like compile books. But, if I have to start writing about my delusion, there's like a little post-it. Exactly, but he has a nice volume. He has volume 2, and General Panuto has volume 3, right? And why is that so? Because actually, to quote Ajahn Jayanto, this monk from Temple Forest Monastery, we're headless monsters. We've never seen our face. We only have an idea of what our face looks like in the mirror, and we hardly are in front of the mirror most of the time. So it's the same with our defilements. We kind of have a vague idea of what it looks like, but fundamentally we don't, because we're so immersed in it that we have a really, really vague, distorted idea. But everyone else around us sees it. So we should be encouraging admonishment, and we should also admonish others. We should also do that to bring up the defilements of others at the appropriate time with a mind of loving kindness, with the intention for it to be beneficial. So not out of anger, not out of aversion, but rather with a wholesome intention in the mind. And so that's when we're using right speech. If we're cursing about anyone, whether it's Trump or whether it's, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, like, it doesn't matter. But our intention is really not pure. It's not beneficial. It's definitely not with a mind of loving kindness. There's lots of different qualifications that the statement doesn't meet. But on the flip side, if we know that something is true, and there is some benefit in, sharing that. So, for example, if certain policies are harmful to groups of people in this country, then it's important to highlight it. It's important to put some, attention to it and some gravity into it. And then we know we have a pure heart. So we're practicing just like the Buddha. We know that our intention is compassion. Our actions are motivated by caring about others rather than just ranting or being attached to our views or having some sort of righteous indignation. So those are my 2 cents on the subject matter. I don't know if fellow venerables have anything else to add.
Okay.
Maybe Bhante Sumana? Seems...
Oh, well, something came to mind as Ayasoma was talking about sort of the factors to examine. Is it true? Is it beneficial? Is it the right time? And also, is this something that's going to potentially be displeasing to someone to hear? And it's interesting that the Buddha gives cases where, for example, he wouldn't say something that's not beneficial under any circumstance. He wouldn't say something that's not true under any circumstance. He wouldn't say something that's not at the appropriate time. But sometimes there are situations where you have to say something displeasing because that's going to be beneficial, or at least the intention is for it to be beneficial. So again, it's not that the Buddha said, oh, you're great, everything's fine, even though you condone killing sentient beings, and even though you're teaching wrong view, it's okay, I won't say anything. No, sometimes you have to say something really strong so someone can snap out of their delusions. And of course, you have to be very careful with that. But if someone is about to drive off a cliff, you don't say, "Oh, dear friend, I think maybe it's time to consider that there's another direction that we could take." No, you're like, "You're about to drive off a cliff. What the hell?" So sometimes you do have to be very vocal. But again, it is like Ayasoma said, examining, is that with a mind of loving kindness? Is that with a mind of preventing harm? Or is it to cause more harm, to cause more divisiveness? Or is it coming from bitterness? Because that can also come up, especially with people who are doing very unwholesome things, that we have this righteous indignation, really, that this is not right and it shouldn't be happening. Therefore, we think the other person should suffer so that they can understand. But really, causing other people to suffer just pushes them deeper into their delusion. So it's never the right option to intentionally make someone suffer in order to teach them a lesson. They won't learn the lesson. But rather, with a mind of compassion, you can be firm with someone, but in a way that's helping them rather than pushing them away.
Sadhu.
Okay, so then some follow-ups on the military question. Melinda says, I was in the Navy and I had the same problems, especially on my ship, but I made it and would not recommend Buddhists to go into the military. So generally speaking, I do agree with that, but there's one interesting case I know of who it's a person who was a Buddhist priest who became an army chaplain. And I met this guy in person once and I was talking with him and I was like, well, why did you do this? Well, the military is a very uncomfortable place to be if you're following the 5 precepts. And he said he did it because there are almost no Buddhist chaplains in the military.
Actually, when I was in 2008, there were 5.
Oh, wow.
And that was for 1.5 million people.
Yeah, so this is why he decided to become number 6. Or actually, he might have been one of the 5. Because 2008, I met him around that time. He might have been one of the 5 then. Yeah, so that's a very compassionate reason. Actually, I think it's the only good reason I can think of for Buddhists to join the military.
Probably, yeah.
Jizo Bodhisattva.
Yeah. So interesting fellow. So he talked about the difficulties he had. For one thing, he faced extreme discrimination. All the other chaplains, except the other 4 Buddhist ones, all the other chaplains wanted him out. They weren't happy to have a Buddhist on board. But all the more reason for him to be there. Let's see. And Gabriella clarifies that her friend works in engineering and designs boats. Well, what comes to mind for me is that a boat is just a big floating weapon. So your friend designs big floating weapons.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. That's something to really take a look at. Like, boats for what? Are these boats for carrying things, or do they know that these boats are going to be weapons platforms? A lot of questioning is needed. It's yeah, it just gets funny when you know that you're supporting something that is involved with violence, or is involved with slavery, or is involved with meat production, or involved with intoxicants. You have to really take a step back and like, is there another way to do this? Even when I was in the military, I found the only way that I could get through the day was to take that step back and let everybody know I was taking that step back and saying, I'm not going to immediately do things in this area just because that's what I've been told to do. Like, I'm the owner of my karma at the end of the day. And I think that's what your friends can consider. You said they're going to listen to this. Just what kind of karma do they want to be producing? What kind of fruits of karma do they want to inherit in the future?
Okay. And Danilo says, Gabriella has asked you before for me about me counting meditation, and for the last few weeks I've tried to not count, but it keeps coming back and stressing me out. Do you have any more tips? Honestly, I don't remember. Does anyone remember this thing with counting meditations? Maybe if you can, Danilo, if you can type in your question again, because we don't know what you mean by counting meditation. And Gabriella gave some quotes from a sutta about the rarity of human rebirth. So thank you, Gabriella, for sharing the sutta references. Mark says, I am a licensed hypnotist and was trained in pain management and have seen some truly miraculous results, especially when my teacher worked with people. Is this okay? Like, am I delaying their karma?
Okay. As we actually I talked about this with the cause of suffering, so the second noble truth. And it's just because you might not be dealing with the ultimate cause of a disease or an affliction doesn't mean you shouldn't try to help. It's about your intention to be of benefit to somebody. If that's your motivation, then go for it. It's compassionate. And most healers that I have found that can actually do good things, the basic skill is metta. Like they actually want what's best for the person. And at the end of the day, that means they're with the person, they listen to them, they consider the whole scenario and what's for the best. So yeah, hypnotism, magnets, pills. It's like if you're really trying to help the person be well and happy, then it'll work out for the best.
I would also add to that there's no such thing as delaying another person's karma. Each person experiences their karma in their own way, and that's not something that we can predict, and it's not something that we have any control over. What we have control over is our own karma, and we should always do as much good karma as we can. And so if your way of doing good karma is to help people reduce their pain, that's great. Keep it up. That's good karma. Next question. John asks, when we make an effort to be more virtuous and disciplined, what is the key factor in this change? What is the root of goodness? Ayasoma.
Make an effort to be more virtuous and this discipline. What is the key factor in this change? What is the root of goodness? I would say happiness is a clear sign that virtue is increasing, that our goodness is developing. Honestly, whenever I meet Asian Buddhists, for example, for the most part, it's really tangible. Actually, when we were traveling in Thailand, for example, as it's so, the culture is so permeated with, so embedded with Buddhist values of generosity, of giving, of virtuous behavior. It's incredible the pervasive happiness and kindness of people. They have it in their bones. There is a good friend of Empty Cloud Monastery, our friend Benz, or our friend Luciana who's coming tomorrow, or our friend Cam, the Countless Beings. They're so incredibly inspiring. They're all born Buddhists. And our friend Victor, we call him Matapindika. And they're all such happy people. So you just see how powerful this practice is. So a lot of times we tend to approach, if we don't have it naturally, sort of developed, we tend to approach it with this kind of like, oh, I have to do this and I have to do that. And okay, I need to practice generosity, so let me do a recurring donation of $29.99 to that association or that other association. It becomes a little bit like this utilitarian way of going about practice. And it's not joyful. Or, you know, we go and like volunteer at a monastery and we clean up and we do this sort of thing. We were talking about it the other night. That's why my understanding, that's why the Buddha talks about, you know, different types of karmic retribution that come with different ways through which we practice generosity, and being quote unquote the best incredible karma when we are giving as much as we can in an anonymous way, in an anonymous form where nobody knows. And it's not that, once again, like it's a video game where you're like, oh, well, you know, I give this to Bhante Sudha, so he knows it's me. And, you know, this is not a thing that I'm particularly attached to. So, okay, I get 1 point. But I really like this blanket. So, okay, this is 10 points. But if I just leave it, it appears on his bed with a note anonymous, then it's 100 points, you know? Like, it's not a video game that we're like, ding, like Super Mario Bros. And that's like, ding. Maybe that's like very old vintage from the 90s. Wow, I'm getting late. Yeah, I'm getting old.
They still make Mario games.
They do?
Yeah.
Oh.
They never stopped. They're still cashing in on that one.
Okay, great. So I can pretend I'm still young.
No, you can't.
But rather, it's we should observe our mind and really see how are we giving and what are the effects of our mind. And so when it's anonymous, we really get the opportunity. We have the opportunity to really test our natural generosity when there's basically no payback. Nothing traceable that comes to us. So how much can we give when we have sort of understanding that nobody will know that we have given the amount that we have given? And we can see our stinginess, and we can see our generosity, and we can kind of work on increasing the generosity, and we'll see an incredible amount of happiness and kindness appearing in the mind. But also, conversely, we'll see like an amount of suffering appearing in the mind. When we started Buddhist Insights, I thought of myself actually as a pretty generous person. But the first retreats, I won't go into details, you know, and I was working a lot. I was working so many hours I was a layperson and without any form of payment, and doing a lot of tasks that I would have never done had I been paid, ironically. A lot of aversion started rising in my mind because all the work that I was doing was a thankless job. So I was like, I'm like an idiot working 16 hours a day for these people that don't care whether or not I spend 16 hours or 24 hours or like 1 hour, or like I don't do it at all. And so I had to deal with this dukkha in my mind. And this awareness allowed me to see how much work there was to do. How I thought of myself being all generous and kind, but in reality, I mean, I was up to a certain extent. I was generous and kind if like to Bhante Sumano, if Bhante Sumano would go like, oh, you're such a wonderful being, Ayasoma. I love you. Thank you so much. How can I help you? But if Bhante Sumano was kind of like, okay, thanks, whatever. I would go like, I used to like Bhante Sumano, but actually he's really not that nice now that I think about it on second thought. Right? Ugliness.
Hate type.
Yeah, but you know, actually there is that hate in every one of us. And it's good, important. As the Buddha says, we have to become aware of our blemishes. And we also have to be aware of our wholesomeness when there is no blemish. So we keep it up when it's like a good, you know, wholesome situation, wholesome quality, and we nourish it. And if when we see the blemish, we go, okay, actually, this is pretty ugly. Let me scrub it off. Let me do something about it. And that's where, it's not just a winning game like the karma points that you get, but rather it's, once again, an opportunity for practice, for developing wholesome mind states, for really making progress in the path. And joy naturally arises, happiness arises, and aversion decreases.
Okay. And Gita Ratnayake asks, is there a meditation method that helps with feelings of guilt? Bhante Sumana?
Compassion meditation. So the sort of stock phrase for loving kindness is "May everyone be happy." But the kind of stock phrase for compassion meditation is "May everyone be free from suffering," which I've actually found really helpful for dealing with feelings of remorse or guilt. So this, you can sense that guilt and remorse they're heavy. There are these burdens that we carry around actually willingly, almost as a form of self-punishment, self-flagellation. And so it's worth looking at where that guilt is coming from, both in the sense of what's triggering it, but also why is it that we feel like we need to berate ourselves? Similar to what I had said about suffering or causing someone to suffer does not help them change. Berating ourselves does not help us to change. In a lot of ways, it can actually make us very powerless and helpless, because then we start to develop this idea that, well, we're that flawed person that made this mistake, and, well, there's nothing we can do about that. So we start to treat ourselves in this really horrible way, actually, thinking that if we treat ourselves horribly, then that's making up for the mistakes that we've made, that's a form of atonement. But it really isn't, actually. So with compassion meditation, may everyone be free from suffering, and that includes ourselves. That gives us some lightness. That gives us some sort of, it's like a salve or a lotion that sort of cools our wounds a little bit, so that we're not just beating ourselves over our backs, that we can actually be kind to ourselves, especially since we're causing ourselves this suffering. But I would say that meditation is not enough if you're dealing with issues of guilt and remorse. Actually, if there are things that we've done that we feel like we need to atone for, then the best way to do that, one, recognizing the mistake, and also committing to do better next time. Meditation can help with that, but actually for me, I see that more falls into the activities that we do with body, speech, and mind. So constantly looking at our actions and seeing, are we doing something that's wholesome? There's a sutta to not Ratapala. I'm covering that sutta next week, so I've been thinking about it a lot. There's a sutta with the Buddha talking to Rahula. And he says, well, when you're about to do something, before you do it, think, is this beneficial? Is this wholesome? And if the answer is yes, then it's more than likely okay to do it. But then while you're doing it, consider, so I thought this was wholesome, but now while I'm doing it, is this still wholesome and beneficial? And if it is, then you can continue doing it. And at the end, you reflect, well, the thing that I did, was it wholesome and beneficial? So every step along the way, you're sort of observing your mind, your behavior, and just checking in. So if we've made mistakes in the past, well, we can commit to this sort of reflection in the future, and know that, like Bhante Sudaso mentioned, yes, we may have generated some bad karma in the past, but we're doing whatever we can now to cultivate good karma and good actions. And this is where the teaching of not self also becomes helpful, because then we see that that person that did that thing a year ago, maybe, isn't quite exactly who we are anymore. We've committed ourselves to doing something wholesome, to doing new actions. And so we don't want to judge ourselves by those past actions. We still recognize that they were committed and use that to give us energy. But just like with, say, a cat who kills squirrels and other animals, we don't berate him every day, oh my God, you horrible thing, how did you do that? But we recognize, that was unwholesome and that was horrible. And as a cat, you don't necessarily have much control over your behavior, but now we know better. Well, if he's outside, then we can watch him. If there's living beings around, then we can put him inside. And we recognize that today he hasn't killed anything. And that's a good thing. And tomorrow, it's a good thing. And inevitably, he'll probably mess up because he's an animal. And he may kill something. But again, it's that, wow, this is really horrible. What can we do to prevent this in the future? So having that same mindset for yourself is helpful, because we're all unenlightened. We're all going to make mistakes. But it's that commitment to doing better and recognizing it. And just like in the Gavesi Sutta, going higher and higher, practicing and practicing. So that eventually, actually, when we attain full enlightenment, hopefully in this life, then we won't make those mistakes anymore.
Okay. And Gabriella asks, I have been hit with grief right now that is inexpressible. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a judge I absolutely loved, is now dead, and I'm now in deep grief. How do I deal with it right now? I know dear ones are the root of sadness, but as a kid, I wanted to be someone like her. And I was still very deeply proud of her as a person and as a judge. I'm trying hard to comfort my family as well.
Sounds like you got your answer right there. Like, celebrate this person. We all die, we all pass away, and yeah, you've lost not the person, you've lost the ability to get more of the person. What you have got is still there. So cherish it, reflect on it, honor it. It's all you can do at this point. But it's all you can do for 99% of the people you've ever come in contact with. You don't know that you're ever going to see them again. But you can value the interactions that you did have. And it's still going to hurt. But it can help.
Yeah, in fact, Adriana is looking pretty morose right now. Yeah. Yeah, and also just reflect, a lot of people are also affected by this. So it's not just you. So you can also have compassion for all the other people who are struggling with the same grief and disappointment, but who don't have the foundation in Buddhist practice that you have. So for them, it's much more difficult to face these conditions. But since you have some background in Buddhist training, then it's a bit easier for you. So also cultivate compassion for those who are less able to face these kinds of difficult emotions. So next, Elaine asks, how are decisions made at the monastery? Is there a boss, like someone who has the final say? Yes, there is a boss who has the final say. Her name is Aya Soma.
The first say, the middle say, and most importantly, the final say.
She occasionally accepts input from the lesser beings, but she usually discards that input if it doesn't line up with her own ideas.
It's not true.
It's 90% true.
Next question.
So, Mark asks, so in my mind, it seems that not all things are the result of our past actions, and that we did something bad in the past, that there really are accidents or bad people doing bad things. What did the Buddha say about this? Well, I have some bad news for you. Everything is karma. And you will find the occasional Theravada teacher who quotes this one specific sutta where the Buddha makes an obscure statement about the pain arising from illness. And they will use that one single statement about the pain related to illness to claim that not everything is karma. But that flies directly contrary to everything else the Buddha said throughout the entire Tipitaka. So I go with everything else the Buddha said as clearly indicating that everything is causal, everything is conditional, nothing happens without prior cause and condition, and that cause and condition is our own actions, is our own karma that we create through body, speech, and mind over the course of countless lifetimes. Since that's the message the Buddha conveys over and over and over and over and over and over again in literally hundreds of suttas, that's the message that I stick to. Those are my thoughts. Not that I have strong opinions about this. But advanced warning, you may hear some other Theravada teachers who will say not everything is karma, but keep questioning them about causality. Keep questioning them about dependent origination. Keep questioning them. And eventually you'll back them into a corner where they finally admit that actually, yes, everything is karma. It just takes a little while. I've gone through exactly this sequence with a number of famous Buddhist teachers, a number of famous Buddhist monks in particular. You just keep poking and poking and poking and poking and poking and poking, and finally they break down and admit that everything is karma. It just takes a little while sometimes.
If I could.
No. Yes, go ahead.
I just thought to add that if it helps, not everything is necessarily caused by past karma. What you're doing right now also matters.
That's true.
And if something bad happens to you, take a moment and consider whether or not you got into the situation where that bad thing is happening to you, led along by greed, hatred, and delusion. I know in my own life, I've found myself in situations that something goes wrong for me, and I trace it back, and I'm like, well, yeah, I was like seeking something, or I was averse to something. You know, the whole reason I ended up here was because of a chain of bad decisions. So in that case, you say it's not based on past karma, it's based on your current karma.
That's very thankful or encouraging. Thank you, Bante.
You mean that led you here at Anti-Cloud Monastery?
Anti-Cloud is dukkha, but of course everywhere else is dukkha too.
Actually, that's a good reflection. So we got to the point we are now because of a series of bad choices, but also because of a series of good choices. So life is always a mixture of the two until you become an arhat. Dem says, Buddhist chaplains remind me of Kshitigarbha, the bodhisattva who helps beings in the hell realms. Yeah, that's the Japanese name is Jizo. So for some reason, most Westerners know Kshitigarbha by the Japanese name, Jizo. Chinese is Dizang. But most people know him as Jizo. Yeah. Clearly, every one of us has the Jizo vow, since life is pretty hellish these days. So here we are. So Danilo clarified the earlier question and says, a while ago, I counted the amount of sessions in minutes, which after some point began to stress me out because I looked at the hunger. Is that maybe a typo for number, or is it hunger? It makes sense either way. Like hunger for a bigger number. I looked at the hunger, or I looked at the number rather than the tranquility of the meditation. And then there's more about this, the counting the numbers in minutes rather than just doing the meditation. Yeah, again, one thing that I would ask is, why are you counting the numbers in minutes? Because the numbers in minutes are actually totally irrelevant. One really interesting story with Ajahn Chah was somebody once asked Ajahn Chah, should I do long periods of sitting meditation? And Ajahn Chah's answer was, well, look at a chicken. A chicken sits on its nest for hours and hours at a time, barely moving a muscle, sitting still for hours and hours and hours. You don't see any enlightened chickens. So clearly, just racking up a lot of hours of sitting meditation is not the path to enlightenment. So you can do 100 hours of sitting meditation, 1,000 hours of sitting meditation, 10,000 hours, 100,000 hours of sitting meditation. It doesn't matter at all. Not one bit. What matters is the quality of mind while you're meditating. That's what matters. I've met a lot of people who say that they've been meditating for decades. And yet they act like they've never done any Buddhist practice at all. And I've met other people who they've done very little meditation in their life, and yet they have incredibly bright, wholesome, and stable minds. So clearly the number of minutes is not what's important. What's important is the wholesome qualities of mind. Are they present? Are they not present? Are they strong? Are they weak? That's what's important. So if you're going to measure your meditation, don't measure it by minutes. Minutes are pointless. The truth is we've done countless, hundreds of thousands of millions of billions of hours of meditation over countless lifetimes. And all of that has amounted to zero. Absolutely nothing. That's what it's amounted to. So I missed my afternoon nap, and I drank espresso. So those two things together make me a little bit sharper tongued than usual. So I hope you all will forgive me for the sharp tongue. Maybe I should just stop answering questions and let my gentler companions give gentler answers.
Sometimes we need.
So I think I'm gonna zip it now and let somebody else talk about this.
It's great. You're like, you're all about numbers. I got a number for you.
Oh dear. Wow, we also caught Bante Sudaso cracking up on camera, which is a rare occasion in general. But to record it on camera, I think it's the first.
Okay. Anything about this? The problem with counting minutes?
Good.
We settled it?
Yes.
Okay. James asks, what is a good way to develop the perception of one's own death? Who wants to talk about that?
I can talk about that since I've been actually developing that, working on that just these days. So speaking of chickens, as we mentioned a few times these days, the two of the resident chickens were killed, and it was very sad. Still a sad thing that we're dealing with, sad loss that we're dealing with. And actually right behind Venerable Pamuto, there is a golden Buddha, and right in front of him, there are the feathers of both Hima and Yamaka. And I normally sit in the morning for meditation where Venerable Pamuto is. And actually I've been recollecting my own death through the death of the chickens. So realizing, for example, that neither of them, I knew that day that it was going to happen. So that death was that was, the time when they were going to die. And that neither of them knew that was the time and place in which they were going to die. And thinking about Yama, the chicken left, it's really tangible to see her understanding for the first time of death. And I'm not projecting, by the way. It's actually visible. It's incredible how she has switched entirely her personality. So from being this reckless, fearless hen who was going not only like around the property of the monastery, but jumping into not only the neighbor's yard, but like going blocks away. So like the extended neighborhood knew her. We would meet these neighbors going, oh, like your chickens are coming to visit. And so she was the most, she would cross the street, no problem with cars, really confident, owning the world, to losing her sisters who she was born and raised with. And this has shattered her entire sort of way of conceiving, of perceiving the threat of the predators. Up until now, there were always causes and conditions that impeded predators from, including us. I ran so many times after the fox. It was kind of amusing for my fellow spiritual practitioners. So there was always like, a kind of idea, safe, a fake sense of safety. So she wasn't really understanding how fragile her life was and how fragile her safety net was. But all of a sudden, since her two sisters were taken away, she's incredibly aware of this. And she's extremely skittish. She doesn't leave. She doesn't really spend much time roaming around. She's haunted by fear. She's very traumatized, and it's been going on now for several days. And it's so human. We tend to think of animals as being these like weird creatures. Actually, it's somewhat ironic because we were kind of having this conversation before this tragedy happened here with the resident lay people, and we all had all different like weird theories on how chickens were coping in a different way than humans. Like in hindsight now, I'm laughing about myself too, because having known them for so long, and I was like, oh yeah, they actually have, it takes them 2 seconds to get over any kind of trauma that they have. Not like us humans that ruminate on it. Nah, BS. It's the same exact thing. They just have feathers instead of like arms and hands. But yeah, like, all of these sort of this delusion and of our own death and the death of others, it's so palpable, so actually beautiful and sad at the same time to see it in her, that it has been a mirror of myself. So I've been recollecting in the past days by looking at the feathers that I have no idea when I'm going to die, but that I am of the same nature, and I don't know in what manner it's going to happen. Perhaps a predator, will kill me, and perhaps I'll have an awful, brutal death, or perhaps I will die in my sleep. I don't know. It might be tomorrow. It might be in 10 years. It might be right now. It might be in 50 years. Who knows? We don't know. All we know is that we're going to die. So whenever we're experiencing the loss of someone, or if we have experienced in the past, I think that's the sort of, or we see people grieving around us. I think all of these are good starting points to make it real, to really reflect on this, and really be able to face it. I mean, I'm still working on it, but it's been extremely sad, but extremely powerful.
Okay, and we're starting to get close to 9 o'clock, so I think it's time to switch to Zen answers. So this one's for Bhante Seminole. When practicing the anatta meditation given to Bahya or Malunkyaputta, is it necessary to develop jhana if we find success gradually with it?
I was following the question until the very end.
So when practicing the anatta method given to Bahya or Malunkya Buddha.
Mhm.
Is it necessary to develop jhana if we find success gradually with it?
Oh,
As in,
success with the
anatta, Prabhaya anatta method.
No, I don't think so, because you're having success with it. So no. Jhana does help, obviously. It helps with all factors of the path, but it's also a state that's very difficult to achieve. So if you're having results from just your gradual practice, then I would say keep doing that, but also, keep the intention to develop deeper and deeper states of samadhi.
Okay. Elaine asks, are any of you familiar with the practice of POA?
Mhm.
If so, what are your thoughts on this? You're familiar?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, POA is a Tibetan practice. It's for the development of a channel where what is it? You attain enlightenment at the time of death, or it's basically freeing up the channel through which it's said that the mind will exit out of the body at the time of death. So this can actually happen after death too. But the idea is you get a transmission from somebody who's familiar with the practice, and it's to try to open this channel so that, say, as you're dying, gradually, if you're lucky enough to have a gradual death, then the elements start like fading from your consciousness. Your consciousness, the component parts start falling away, and POA is to kind of help you just like let go of the body. I was really interested in it for a little bit. I thought, wouldn't it be neat if I could get kind of initiated in this, and just kind of like a safety net. Yeah, you could have a sudden death or something, but um, I don't know if there's a question in there, but I would say don't hold your breath for it because it's really just an accessory. Like these cushions we're sitting on, it's an accessory to practice. It's not necessary for any particular realization. It's just like, yeah, you don't know how or when you're going to die. You don't know what mind state you'll be in. If you just kind of open up the channel, maybe you'll get out with a little bit of reflective capacity before consciousness kind of dissolves. But yeah, it's just one of these things you can make a big deal about, but it doesn't have anything to do with the Eightfold Path.
Okay. And Elaine asks, how are the new venerables settling into the monastic life?
Oh, us.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Great.
Okay, there you go. And Elaine says, I would like to say that I have always been on the outside looking in, never really feeling that I fit in and somehow different from most people. But with you, I feel I have come home. Thank you for being here.
Aww.
That's very sweet.
Yeah, it's great to have this dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, and you ask good questions. You have interesting things to contribute. You've sent care packages to the monastery. So we're very happy to have you in our lives as well, Elaine. You're a great person. And I hope you come visit us in person sometime.
Sadhu.
John asks, what are the most important lessons you've learned so far as monks? And what do you hope to learn in the future? Go ahead.
How about I go last? Yes, let's do it like this.
She who decides has decided.
The most important lesson I feel that I learned, but I don't know. It's like I feel like I quickly arrived at this was to let go of insights, to let go of lessons. That's what frees you up for the next lesson. So it's like every time I have an insight, I'm like, wow, this is really profound. Okay, what's next? And just let it go. Don't cling to it.
Well, that's hard to follow up.
Mhm.
It's your own fault for making me go first.
Most important lesson I've learned, don't make a big deal out of anything. Yeah. What do I hope to learn in the future? How to attain complete enlightenment. Okay, your turn.
You're
We'll
going
go
last.
last.
I think the most important thing I've learned actually is the importance of generosity. And the importance of being the recipient of people's generosity. So that's actually something I really took for granted as a layperson because it wasn't as obvious. But one, seeing how you can still be generous even when it seems like you have nothing that you can give. Like being a monastic, for example, we don't really have possessions. Our wardrobe is like this big, it can fit like a pile this high. But you realize actually that those things are not the most important thing to give somebody in any direction, really, even for lay people. But rather, it's these habits of mind that we're cultivating and sharing the practice that really has a lot of benefit. And it's been the same, actually, interacting with people and just seeing how they also represent very clearly, actually, wholesome mind states, wholesome attitudes, and live wholesome lives. So I think actually that was the most groundbreaking thing for me, being on alms round and having this like little baby like drop a banana in my alms bowl. His mom put the banana in his hands, but he was the one who sort of like gave it to me. And that really brightened my mind and also helped pull me out of sort of this self-centered mindset of me practicing for myself and I need to attain enlightenment, yada, yada, yada. But actually seeing how, one, being a monastic is actually a huge responsibility. But two, also seeing that responsibility. Oh, sorry, somebody popped up at the window. It's Victor. Seeing how it's a huge responsibility, but also seeing that responsibility means there's multiple ways that we can help others, and that the way that we help others actually helps ourselves. And so it just helped me really understand how generosity really works in two directions and how it's a beautiful thing that gets discarded so easily when people think of practice. But really, I think it's the most important thing about Buddhist practice. I also hope to become fully enlightened, hopefully in this life.
Okay, Aya?
Great. What was the question again?
What are the most important lessons you've learned so far as monks, and what do you hope to learn in the future?
What I hope to learn in the future is very similar to Dante Seminole, so supreme enlightenment. What I've learned so far is how much delusion there is in my mind. It's incredible. So I have this like clear memory of my sort of mind state pretty much every year or so. And every year since I've practiced, also the sort of realization of all the delusion that had been dispelled. And then this kind of sense of, oh, I had no idea there was all that delusion to begin with until I dispelled it. So yeah, you can only see it in hindsight. You can only connect the dots after, in hindsight. You can't really connect them ahead of time. So yeah, this has been the most amazing, but also kind of sometimes discouraging part of the practice. It comes back to the volumes that we were talking about. We should probably do that. We should write all the volumes of each other, of like, because actually they are the repositories of all this information.
Delusion, Volume 3.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like the Pali Canon, right? but just tailored to each individual. So yeah, it's kind of incredible sensation of becoming a new person in every moment, and realizing the absurdities that were flowing in the mind, and also the self-identities that I had in the past. Some that are still lingering around, some that have completely disappeared, and some new ones that have appeared. So yeah, the biggest gift is awareness, understanding of my current state of being and of my suffering. And yeah, I have no idea actually how I spent most of my life without the Dhamma. It was horrible. No wonder I was depressed all the time. So yeah, now that I have the teachings, which is such an incredible gift, it is inconceivable for me to live without this light that sheds, that removes the confusion and unclarity of every situation. So once again, getting back to the grief, for example, that I've been experiencing lately, it's not the first time in my life that I experienced grief, but it's the first time that I experienced grief, understanding, knowing what is currently happening. And even though Bhante Sudasura is kindly pointing to the time, we started 4 minutes late, so we can end 4 minutes late.
No.
Yes.
Okay, so next question. Elijah asks about coming as a lay resident at the monastery. Yeah, send us an email. You can use the contact form on the website. We can talk about possibilities. He also asked where Pramutto's eyebrows went.
Yes, finally someone noticed or said something about it.
Well, yeah. Elijah was there when I was at Temple Monastery, and I thought I was going to stay at Temple Monastery. I went up to Ajahn Jayanto and said, "Can I remove these eyebrows? Because they were getting so long that a strong breeze would blow them and poke me in the eye." So there are two answers. The quick one is I got full ordination. The slightly longer one was that I was standing in front of a mirror, and I just looked up at them, and I knew I was going to get ordained in 3 days. And I'm like, oh, I should just shave these off now. And I went to do it, and then I realized, oh, everybody's going to comment on the fact that I don't have them. And then I realized, the heck kind of motivation is that not to do something that's, the right thing to do and will facilitate, moving ahead in my life, that everybody's going to say everything. And so I just, okay, everything's impermanent. And they're like, wow, it doesn't feel any different to me. And yet, as soon as I walked downstairs, everyone's like, "Wow! What happened?" I was particularly like, "Your eyebrows!"
When he says everyone, he means the two of us.
Yeah. I was just like, oh yeah, no eyebrows. Yep, seen that before. In fact, most of the years I've known Pramutto, he had no eyebrows. So to me, it looked perfectly normal. Anyway, that was the last question, and it's almost 9 o'clock, so I think we can go ahead and end it there. So thank you all for your participation. Monk chat is always a lovely thing. So let's end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right, see you all next time.